You are in my world now, old man.
The loudest man in the room is rarely the strongest. Real power almost never introduces itself. It doesn't demand attention, raise its voice, or chase respect. It simply waits, and on one rainy night deep in West Texas, one undefeated black belt made a single mistake that would permanently change the way he understood strength, discipline, and justice. If someone had walked into the Longhorn Roadhouse diner at exactly 10:47 p.m., they would have noticed the champion first. Everyone always did. The walls of the small roadside diner glowed beneath old neon signs as rain hammered against the windows. Outside, endless rows of 18-wheelers rested beneath dim parking lot lights, their engines ticking softly. After hundreds of miles across America's highways, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with grilled burgers and diesel fuel, creating the familiar atmosphere that thousands of truck drivers across the country simply called home. Inside, conversations paused for only a second as the front door opened, and a confident young athlete stepped inside with 3 friends. People recognized him immediately. Logan Carter, the undefeated mixed martial arts champion from West Texas, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, the local sports hero whose highlight videos filled social media feeds every weekend. Several customers smiled. One teenager quietly whispered his name. Another customer reached for a phone, hoping to capture a picture with the hometown celebrity. Before he ordered dinner, Logan welcomed every glance. He had grown comfortable living in the spotlight. Success had brought championships, sponsorships, interviews, and thousands of followers online. Over time, constant praise slowly convinced him that confidence and superiority were the same thing. Across the diner, however, sat someone who never looked up. Near the window rested a quiet man wearing faded blue jeans, worn leather boots, a weathered trucker's cap, and a thick denim jacket that had clearly survived years on American highways. His name was Jack Sullivan, 53 years old. His hands carried deep scars earned through decades of hard work. His face reflected countless sunrises, witnessed through the windshield of a Peterbilt truck. A plain ceramic mug of black coffee sat beside an old paperback novel, while a folder containing freight documents rested neatly on the table. Nothing about him suggested importance. Nothing about him attracted attention. He looked like thousands of hard-working truck drivers who quietly keep America's stores supplied, hospitals stocked, factories running, and families fed without ever expecting recognition. Most people would have walked right past him without remembering his face. Jack preferred it that way. Peace had become more valuable to him than attention. Outside, his dark blue Peterbilt waited patiently beneath the rain, carrying an important overnight shipment scheduled to arrive before sunrise. Missing that deadline wasn't an option. Someone several states away was depending on that delivery, just as countless Americans depended on truck drivers every single day, without ever thinking about who was behind the wheel. Jack understood responsibility. He also understood something many people never learned. The strongest people rarely feel the need to prove they're strong. Near the front counter, Officer Maya Brooks, a respected black police officer with the Amarillo Police Department, had stopped for coffee while finishing the final hour of her patrol shift. Wearing her Navy uniform with quiet professionalism, she exchanged a warm smile with the elderly waitress. Before thanking her for the fresh refill, Officer Brooks had served her community for nearly 12 years. She had responded to domestic violence calls, highway accidents, missing children, and dangerous armed robberies. Experience had taught her that real courage wasn't measured by who could throw the hardest punch. Real courage meant protecting strangers, remaining calm during chaos, making difficult decisions when everyone else was overwhelmed. As she glanced around the diner, her trained instincts quietly observed every customer. Without drawing attention to herself, everything appeared peaceful. Yet years in law enforcement had taught her that situations could change in seconds. Meanwhile, Jack slowly turned another page of his novel without noticing the attention surrounding Logan Carter. Or perhaps he noticed it and simply didn't care. There was no arrogance in his silence. Only discipline, only patience. Only the quiet confidence of a man completely comfortable with who he was. Because while some men spend their entire lives trying to convince the world they're dangerous, others carry enough experience to know that real strength is never something that needs an audience. The front door swung shut behind Logan Carter, but the energy he carried lingered throughout the diner like a sudden thunderstorm rolling across the Texas plains. Conversation slowed. Forks paused halfway to plates. Even the cooks behind the counter glanced through the serving window, recognizing the undefeated local champion whose face had become familiar across sports broadcasts, gym advertisements, and social media clips. Logan had built a reputation few young athletes could match. 29 years old, an undefeated professional mixed martial artist, a respected Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, a man whose victories filled highlight reels and whose confidence grew larger with every hand raised in victory. Years of success had convinced him that he belonged at the center of every room he entered. His broad shoulders, tattooed arms, and expensive athletic clothing immediately separated him from everyone else inside the diner. Walking beside him were 3 training partners who admired everything he said. They laughed loudly before Logan even finished his jokes, reinforcing the image he had carefully built around himself. One of them opened the door for him. Another pulled out a chair before he reached the counter. The attention felt normal to Logan now. In his mind, respect wasn't something earned anymore. It was something expected. The elderly waitress behind the register smiled politely as she approached the group with menus. "Evening, gentlemen. Long training session tonight." Logan flashed the confident grin that had become his trademark. You could say that he stretched his shoulders before placing a championship gym jacket across one of the stools. "My opponent lasted less than 2 rounds, one of his friends laughed. "Coach said, nobody in Texas can keep up with you anymore." Another added proudly, "Man, you're ready for national television?" Logan accepted every compliment without hesitation. Instead of showing gratitude, he simply nodded as though those words described ordinary facts. Years earlier, he had entered martial arts because his father believed discipline would keep him away from trouble. His first instructor had taught respect before punches, humility before victories, and self-control before strength. Somewhere along the journey, the trophies became more important than the lessons. The applause became louder than the principles. The victories fed his ego faster than they developed his character. Inside the diner, a young boy sitting with his mother recognized Logan immediately. "Mom," he whispered excitedly. "That's the Fighter One watch online." His mother smiled warmly. "If you want an autograph, ask politely." The boy carefully walked toward Logan, carrying a paper napkin and a pen. "Mr. Carter, would you sign this?" Logan barely looked down before taking the pen. "Sure." He scribbled his signature across the napkin in less than 2 seconds, before handing it back without making eye contact. The child smiled anyway. Children often admire talent long before they understand character. Watching from across the room, Officer Maya Brooks noticed the exchange. She appreciated athletes who inspired young people, but years of serving as a police officer had taught her something that television rarely showed. Communities didn't need more celebrities. They needed more role models. There was an important difference. She quietly thanked the waitress for another cup of coffee before returning her attention to the room. Good officers develop the habit of reading people without appearing to watch them. Officer Brooks noticed Logan's posture. She noticed how his friends constantly validated him. She noticed how every conversation somehow became centered around him. Most importantly, she noticed the complete absence of humility. Experience had shown her that pride alone wasn't dangerous. Unchecked pride often was. Across the diner, Jack Sullivan remained exactly where he had been. One hand rested on the edge of his paperback novel, while the other wrapped comfortably around his coffee mug. He slowly turned another page. Outside, rain continued sliding across the large front windows, blurring the glowing parking lot lights into streaks of golden red. Jack seemed completely disconnected from the excitement surrounding Logan Carter. He wasn't trying to ignore anyone. He simply valued peace more than popularity. Every movement reflected patience, earned through decades of experience. Every action appeared deliberate. Nothing about him suggested weakness. Nothing about him suggested fear. He simply carried himself like a man who had already proven everything he needed to prove. Many years ago, Logan eventually noticed. He glanced around the restaurant while waiting for his meal. Nearly every customer had looked at him. Some had smiled. Others whispered his name. One family even waved politely. Then his eyes stopped on the gray-haired truck driver, sitting alone. By the window, Jack hadn't looked up once. Not when Logan entered, not during the conversations, not when the autograph was signed. Nothing for reasons Logan couldn't explain. That bothered him more than open criticism ever could. People who build their identity around admiration often struggle when they don't receive it. His smile slowly faded. He leaned slightly toward one of his training partners. "You know, that old trucker over there." The man glanced toward Jack. "Never seen him." Logan nodded slowly. "Interesting." His friend shrugged. "Probably doesn't follow MMA." Another laughed, or maybe he forgot his glasses. The group chuckled together. Officer Brooks quietly observed the exchange without interrupting. She had seen similar situations develop before. Sometimes conflicts didn't begin with insults. Sometimes they began because one person's ego couldn't accept another person's indifference. The room still appeared calm. The waitress carried fresh coffee toward Jack's booth. Rain continued tapping gently against the windows. The smell of grilled steak drifted through the diner. Everything looked ordinary, but experienced officers know that ordinary moments can change without warning when pride begins searching for attention. The elderly waitress smiled warmly as she balanced a fresh mug of steaming black coffee on her tray. Her name was Linda, and she had spent more than 30 years serving everyone, from exhausted truck drivers and police officers to military veterans and families traveling across Texas. She understood people better than most. She could often tell who was carrying a heavy heart before they ever spoke a word. "Here you go, Jack," she said with a friendly smile, carefully placing the coffee beside his book. Jack looked up and nodded. "Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it." His calm voice reflected genuine respect. It wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. He believed every hard-working person deserved kindness, whether they wore a business suit, a waitress's apron, or a truck driver's boots. Linda smiled before returning toward the counter. At almost the exact same moment, Logan Carter stood from his stool, laughing loudly as one of his training partners replayed highlights from his latest championship fight. On a cell phone, you should have seen the knockout. One friend bragged Guy never knew what hit him. Logan laughed confidently before swinging his oversized gym bag from his shoulder. Without looking, he carelessly tossed it toward the empty booth beside him. The heavy bag slammed into the edge of the seat. Its momentum carried straight into Jack's table. The ceramic coffee mug tipped instantly. Dark coffee splashed across the tabletop, soaking Jack's paperback novel, his freight documents, and the sleeve of his denim jacket. Before dripping onto the floor, the entire diner became silent. Even the sizzling grill behind the counter suddenly seemed quieter. Several customers looked directly toward Jack. Expecting anger, a few people quietly shook their heads. Linda immediately reached for towels. "I'm so sorry, Jack." Officer Maya Brooks instinctively stood from her seat. Years of law enforcement had taught her that seemingly small disagreements could escalate in seconds when pride entered the conversation. Before anyone else could react, Jack calmly picked up his soaked paperwork. He carefully separated each page, making sure the delivery invoices hadn't been permanently damaged. Then he folded several napkins together and quietly wiped the coffee from the table. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did frustration appear on his face. He simply handled the problem in front of him. Officer Brooks watched closely. Real emotional control was something she respected more than physical strength. Logan finally turned toward the booth after hearing the silence surrounding him. He glanced at the spilled coffee, then at the soaked book, then at Jack. Instead of apologizing, a small smile appeared on his face. "Guess that old book needed a little excitement." His three friends laughed immediately. One slapped the counter. Another smirked confidently. To them, it was just another joke. Jack finished wiping the table before calmly looking at Logan. His expression remained peaceful. His breathing never changed. "Accidents happen," Jack said evenly, "but next time be a little more careful." His words weren't insulting. They weren't threatening. They were respectful. Simple, direct. Most mature adults would have apologized immediately. Instead, Logan's smile slowly disappeared. For the first time that evening, someone had spoken to him without admiration, without fear, without trying to impress him. His ego quietly interpreted respect as disrespect. "You giving me advice?" Logan asked. While taking 2 slow steps toward the booth, Jack remained seated. "I'm simply asking for common courtesy." Several customers exchanged nervous glances. Linda stopped walking. Officer Brooks calmly moved a little closer, without creating panic. Great police officers understand that presence alone often prevents violence before it begins. Logan, Officer Brooks said calmly, "Let's keep tonight peaceful." Her voice carried quiet authority. She wasn't accusing anyone. She wasn't threatening arrest. She was giving everyone an opportunity to make the right decision. Logan looked toward her. "I didn't do anything, officer. I'm just talking." Officer Brooks nodded. "And I'd like it to stay that way." For a brief moment, the tension eased. Jack quietly closed his paperback, placed it inside his weathered leather bag, and carefully organized his shipping documents. Then he reached into his wallet. He placed enough cash on the table to cover his meal and leave Linda a generous tip. She noticed immediately, even after someone had ruined his evening. Jack still chose kindness. Linda smiled softly. "Thank you, Jack." He nodded. "You take care of yourself." Then he picked up his truck keys. The small chrome, Peterbilt keychain reflected the warm lights hanging above the booths. Without another word, he began walking toward the exit. Every step was calm, measured, controlled. He wasn't running away. He simply refused to waste his peace, arguing with someone determined to prove something. Officer Brooks quietly watched him leave. Deep inside, she admired that decision. During her years in uniform, she had learned that walking away from conflict often required more courage than stepping into it. Real strength wasn't always about standing your ground. Sometimes it meant refusing to let someone else's anger become your burden. Logan watched Jack reach the front door. Something inside him wouldn't let the moment end. He couldn't explain it. Jack hadn't insulted him, hadn't challenged him, hadn't embarrassed him. Yet his quiet confidence felt like a personal defeat. People addicted to attention often mistake indifference for disrespect. The rain outside continued falling across the massive parking lot, where rows of 18-wheelers waited beneath glowing streetlights. Jack pushed open the glass door and stepped into the cool Texas night. Without ever looking back, Logan stared through the window. His jaw tightened. His friends noticed the expression on his face. One leaned closer. "You gonna let him walk away like that?" Another laughed quietly. "He thinks you're scared." Neither statement was true, but pride rarely listens to truth. Officer Brooks noticed the change immediately. Years of policing had sharpened her instincts. She recognized the dangerous combination of wounded ego, peer pressure, and public pride. She reached for her radio, not because a crime had occurred, but because experience had taught her that prevention is often the greatest victory in law enforcement. As the diner fell silent once again, no one realized that the biggest battle of the night wasn't about fists. It was about character. One man had chosen patience. Another was choosing pride, and history has shown time and time again that pride almost always loses. If this story made you think about the true meaning of strength, tell us in the comments what defines a real man. Winning every fight or knowing when not to fight at all? And what kind of justice story would you like to see next? Share your ideas below because your comments inspire us, the next stories we bring to this community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for another powerful story where humility, courage, and justice always have the final word.